Hi there, it is Jo from Minerva, and today I'm going to be putting the buttons on my shirt. It's that rather exciting but slightly trepidatious time in sewing a garment where you've made a beautiful job of everything. I've made plackets, cuffs, pocket, collar, a collar stand that matches up at the top, and now it's that feeling of I want to get it finished because I want to wear it, but actually I don't want to mess up and have my buttonholes showing up too much on the front. I want them to look really professional. So let's have a look at some of the ways that we can make a really good buttonhole. There are lots and lots of tools that you can use for making a buttonhole. That's not necessarily that you need them all, but you could take a look at what I'm going to show you and decide which one you really like the look of, or which ones you've already got that you can use really well. So traditionally, women have the buttons on their left hand placket and the right hand placket going over the top. It really doesn't matter. That goes back to a tradition when buttons were really expensive and only rich people had buttons on their clothes and a maid dressed them. So I tend to choose which one of my plackets looks the nicest. That's the one I want on the top, and I'm sure that will be the case for you. So I really like the top stitching on this placket, so I'm going to have this one on the top and the other one on the bottom, and this is going to be the one with the buttons. I'm going to work with the shirt sideways so that I can keep everything really flat for you. And the first place we need to mark is the top button. Again, there are some tailoring traditions here, so it's traditional for the top button that's in the collar stand to be horizontal. Remember, I'm holding this lengthways for you. And then the ones on the button band to be vertical. So I'm going to position my first one. I'm not using the markings from the pattern. I would like my first button to be here. You can also consider if you've got a fuller bust. So buttonholes which are vertical can gape if you're under a bit of strain across a fuller bust. So if you have a fuller bust, you can do horizontal buttons all the way down your button band. Just make sure that you don't go too close to the edge of the button band, because I made a shirt dress once actually from this pattern, my first time using this pattern, and I put them too close to the edge, and because I had metal stud buttons, it was a denim dress, it sort of gave out in the end and split right on the edge. So if you're using vertical buttons holes, then you need to make sure that they're far enough in the button band not to be under any strain on the edge. You can use the button placement marking from the pattern, or you can try your shirt on and see where you've got the biggest places of ease. So maybe across the bust, you want to make sure your buttonhole is across your bust line, and you can, or if you've got a slightly bigger tummy, you might want to make sure that you're not getting a gape over your tummy. So it really is up to you. So don't be bound by the buttonholes on the pattern. And you're going to measure from the center of your buttonhole to the center of your next buttonhole, and you can mark them with chalk and use the tape. You can pin first to sort of see the position and try it on, and then you can decide if you want to move them a little bit. There's no hard and fast rules for buttons. Let's face it, sometimes it might just be you need buttonholes for the amount of buttons that you've got. And those are my button placements. I can use the flexible tape measure, or this doesn't flap around so much, and I can mark on using that dot as the center of my buttonhole. Remember, if you make horizontal buttonholes, when you wear it, if it's fitted and it's pulling a little bit, your button will slide to the outer edge of the band. So for a vertical one, the button tends to stay in the center, but on a horizontal one, your button will slide. If you really want to treat yourself, or you make a lot of buttoned items, then you can use this extendable button gauge. I've only just started using one. I don't know why I haven't used one years ago. It's absolutely fantastic. So I've chosen this one, as my top point, and then I can decide how many buttons have I got and how many do I want. Extend the gauge and mark the center point. There's like a little arrow at the top. You can now put on your buttonhole marking. So I've got a horizontal one in the collar band, a vertical one starting my row, and I don't have to worry about trying to transfer the marking from the other side because I can just use my gauge again. Always make your buttonholes first and then put your buttons on to match. So although I've marked on the other side my buttonhole placement, I'll do the buttonholes first and then match up to be super accurate. I'm going to make buttonholes here. I've got an automatic buttonholer on my machine, so I'm going to use that. If you want to know how to make buttonholes, then you can check out my video here. This shows how to make a 4-step buttonhole on your machine, an automatic buttonhole on your machine, or you could also try hand sewing your buttonholes if you don't have those features. I can't stress this enough, but test your buttonhole on a spare piece of fabric before you go anywhere near your finished top. I've got the button that I'm going to use and I'm going to put that in the back. And on a shirt button, you want it to be quite a tight fit. So some people put a slightly smaller button in the back. It might not be one of the ones or the colour they're going to use, but they're just gauging with a slightly smaller button in the back so that they have they don't have gaping buttonholes on the front of the shirt. That one is slightly smaller than my ones that I'm going to put on my top. On your test piece, don't just test on a single piece of fabric. If your button band is interfaced, try it with a fabric and interfacing and the back of the button band. You need to really try and mimic what you're going to do in a minute on your actual garment. So my button bands aren't interfaced because I used a cord and I wanted it all to be quite soft. And I'm just going to do a little test. I've tested 2 keyhole buttonholes because my top button I would like to be a keyhole style, and for a keyhole style the round end goes at the end that's going to have the most tension, so the button can sit in there. It'll pull away from the end and the button will sit on the fan or curved edge. So that's going to be my one for here. And now I'm going to try a vertical one, and I am going to test it because I've got a cord, so I'm going across the ribs and wales of the cord. So I just want to check that I'm getting the foot sliding across the cord in the opposite direction. I have also tested my buttonhole for the vertical buttonholes. So this one doesn't have the fan on, this one is just it's got a bar tack on both ends. Didn't know if I'd get a little bit of drag and I might need to do something about that, but it doesn't matter which way I put my buttonhole, it works in both directions. So now I am ready to start putting buttonholes onto my top. It's always best to start with one lower down the tail, just because you don't want your first one to be near the top if you're still just learning a little bit. So I'm going to do these 2 first so that I get the hang of it, and then I'm going to work my way back up towards the collar. Goes without saying, but it is just something to check. Make sure you've got enough bobbin thread because nobody wants to run out of bobbin halfway through a buttonhole. Some people make the bottom one a horizontal one, so you might see that on men's shirts, and that's so that around your waist it doesn't come undone when you keep tucking it in and out. Okay, you can tie off the backs of the buttonholes. If you've got a really strong bar tack on the end, you probably can just cut them off, but I'm just going to tie that one. Make sure you use little scissors so you don't make a cutting mistake. So you've got your buttonhole, and there's two ways that you can split your buttonholes. You can use a really sharp seam ripper, and you'll need to put some pins in either end of your button to stop your seam ripper scooting off from one end to the other. Start in the middle and puncture a hole and then cut it out. And I'm finding it quite difficult because I've got 2 layers of cord. So I could use this on a lighter fabric. I've got a different method for thicker fabric. Go back to that one in a minute. And I'm going to use a buttonhole cutter. It's a really sharp chisel and you can be more precise. So I've kind of stopped on this one because I can't, because of the thickness of the seam ripper, I can't quite get to the end as much as I want, and I'm making it a little bit frayed. So with a button chisel cutter, you can be much more precise. So you put the corner into the end of your buttonhole and you can get it right in the center. You can press it with your hand if it's a light fabric, or if it's thicker fabrics like this, you can just give it a little tap on the top. You will need something underneath so that you don't mark your table. You will get a really clean cut, and obviously you need to go from the other end and do the same. So that you can make your buttonhole. If your buttonhole is smaller than the buttonhole cutter, which it will be on my cuffs, because I'm using a slightly different sized button on the cuff, then you can use your mat to your advantage. So you can put your buttonhole halfway over the mat, and it will only cut the bit off the mat that's on the mat and not the bit that's off the mat. And so that you're using half of the buttonhole cutter by only having half contact on the mat. It's particularly good on your collar stand where you might have a little bit of seam allowance in there, where the fabric is really thick. So if you love making shirts, men's shirts, women's shirts, shirt dresses, then these tools, the expandable button gauge and the buttonhole cutter, might be next on your tool list. Okay, I'm done. All my buttons are on. I've got my horizontal one at the top, my vertical ones down here. You sometimes see on the men's one, the last one at the bottom is horizontal, so that horizontal ones have a sort of little bit of ease in them, a little bit of give. So when you're going like this to tuck it in, you've just got a little bit more room. Also got my button plackets done as well, and buttonholes. Hope that's helped you. See you again soon.